Welcome to Vesper Shroud, the place where the line between small-town charm and something far darker gets thinner with every story. Tonight, we're traveling across Pennsylvania, through towns you've heard of, and places locals avoid after sunset. These aren't made-up tales. They come from miners, hikers, night shift workers, and strangers who tried to forget what followed them home. If true horror keeps you curious, tap subscribe and turn on notifications. I promise, the next story will find you. Now take a breath, because once we start, the quiet won't feel so comforting anymore. Story 1, TikTok House, what we captured live. The comment section was laughing when the pale woman started crawling down the stairs. 20,000 people watching the live stream in real time, and they all thought it was part of the show. They thought it was a prank, a bit of spooky content we choreographed to get more engagement, more shares, more viral potential. But I was there. I was holding the camera. I saw her face in that moment, and I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't acting. This wasn't entertainment. This was something terrifying breaking through into our live stream from somewhere we couldn't see, somewhere dark and horrible and beyond our comprehension. My name is Jessica Park. I was the creator behind the TikTok account called New Hope Haunts, a moderately successful content channel with about 300,000 followers who loved watching me and my friends explore supposedly haunted locations, document paranormal activity, and occasionally stage elaborate pranks that blurred the line between genuine investigation and entertainment. We made decent money from brand sponsorships, advertising revenue, and the engagement metrics that came from creating content that was simultaneously creepy and shareable. It was a job that felt less like work and more like being paid to have fun with your friends while exploring interesting historical buildings. In early October, we rented a colonial home in New Hope, Pennsylvania. The house was built in 1784, which in American terms makes it genuinely old, genuinely historic, the kind of place with centuries of stories embedded in its walls and floors and the very foundation that held it upright. The owners who rented it to us were friendly enough, though I noticed they seemed oddly relieved when we said we were only staying for 1 week. When I asked why they seemed so eager to have us leave before the week was through, they gave vague answers about maintenance and scheduling. Nothing specific, nothing that would register as a genuine warning. I didn't press for details. I didn't want to know. Content creators don't. They want to know about the truly terrifying things. We want the appearance of danger without the reality of it, the aesthetic of horror without the genuine threat. My team consisted of 4 people. There was Marcus, who handled the camera work and had a genuine eye for visual composition. There was Rachel, who managed our social media presence and kept track of engagement metrics in real time. There was Tom, who was technically our sound engineer but mostly provided comic relief and skeptical commentary that balanced out the spookier elements of our content. And there was Kylie, who was newer to the group and brought an energy of genuine belief in the paranormal, a kind of authentic enthusiasm that made our content feel less like a cynical cash grab and more like a genuine investigation. We arrived at the house on a Friday afternoon in early October. The weather was turning cold, the days were getting shorter, and the particular quality of light in the late afternoon was creating that eerie atmosphere that happens in fall when the world seems to be dying slowly and deliberately. The house itself was exactly what I expected. Old wooden architecture, white exterior paint that was beginning to peel in places, wraparound porch, the kind of traditional American colonial aesthetic that showed up in history textbooks and magazine spreads about historic New Hope. Inside, the house was less charming and more unsettling. The ceilings were lower than modern houses, the floors creaked persistently, and the furniture was sparse in a way that suggested the owners had removed anything valuable before renting to us. The walls were decorated with generic art and the kind of photographs that come with picture frames when you buy them. The whole space felt hollow, designed to look lived in without actually being inhabited by anyone who cared about the place. We set up our equipment in what had been the formal dining room, positioning cameras to capture the entire main floor, setting up lighting rigs to ensure we could see everything clearly during our live stream. Our plan was simple. We would live stream for 4 hours starting at 9 in the evening, documenting the house, exploring the spaces, trying to capture anything that might suggest paranormal activity. We have our followers watching in real time, commenting and engaging with the content as it happened. If we captured something genuinely interesting or creepy, the engagement metrics would spike. If nothing happened, we still have 4 hours of content that we could edit and post across various platforms. Either way, It was content, which meant it was money, which meant it justified our presence in the house and our exploitation of its supposedly haunted nature. We started the live stream at 9 o'clock on Friday evening. Marcus set the cameras rolling. Rachel opened the social media feeds to monitor comments in real time, and I began the opening segment where I explained the history of the house, the rumors about paranormal activity, and our plan for the investigation. I kept my tone light and engaging, the tone of someone who doesn't genuinely believe in ghosts but is happy to pretend to for the sake of entertainment. For the first hour, nothing happened. We explored the downstairs, walked through the kitchen, checked out the formal living room, did the standard things that paranormal content creators do when they trying to fill time and build anticipation. The comment section was active but not overwhelming. People were watching, but they weren't engaged enough to make the video trend. I could see Rachel frowning slightly as she scrolled through the engagement metrics. We needed something to happen. We needed to give people a reason to keep watching and share this content with their friends. Kylie suggested we move upstairs. She said she was feeling something, a presence, an energy that seemed to be concentrated on the second floor. Tom joked that the only energy he was feeling was hunger, that we should take a break and order pizza. But Kylie persisted, and Marcus was already moving the camera equipment toward the stairs. I followed them upward, conscious of the fact that nothing had happened yet, that we were burning through our livestream time without capturing anything genuinely interesting or shareable. The upstairs hallway was narrow and lined with doors, each one leading to a bedroom or bathroom or some other space from the house. This long history. The air felt colder up here, though that might have been psychological, might have been my brain interpreting the change in atmosphere as something supernatural when it was probably just a difference in how the house, this heating system, was functioning. We walked slowly down the hallway, Marcus filming, creating that deliberate, creepy pacing that always made good content. Then Rachel said something through our earpieces. She was reading the comments, and people were asking about the second woman. She said multiple viewers were asking who the woman was standing behind us in the hallway. Multiple people. Dozens of comments flooding in all at once, all asking the same question, all noting that there was someone visible in the background of the shot, someone pale, someone that hadn't been part of our team, someone terrifying. I turned around immediately, and I saw her, standing at the far end of the hallway. Perhaps 30 feet away was a woman. Pale isn't the right word for her skin. It was more than pale. It was translucent, almost allowing the shadows of the hallway to show through it, creating the impression of something that wasn't entirely solid, something that existed in more than 3 dimensions, something that was phasing between states of being. Her hair was dark and matted, clinging to her head like it had been wet and had dried in uncomfortable positions. She was wearing what looked like a nightgown, white fabric that was stained with something dark, something that looked frighteningly like dried blood. She looked directly at me, and in that moment, I understood something terrible. Her face was wrong. The proportions didn't quite match how human faces are supposed to look. The eyes were positioned too low, the mouth was too wide, and her expression carried a kind of unsettling hunger that made every instinct I had scream danger. I yelled for everyone to get downstairs. I remember my voice sounding strange and panicked in a way that I couldn't quite control. The woman didn't move. She simply stood there at the end of the hallway, watching us with those wrong-positioned eyes, studying us with an intensity that suggested she was deciding something about us, making some kind of judgment about whether we were worth her attention. Marcus kept filming. I don't know if he was brave or stupid or if his instincts as a content creator simply overrode his survival instincts. He was capturing the woman, recording her image, documenting her presence with professional precision even as every part of his body was probably screaming at him to run. The camera didn't lie. The footage showed exactly what I was seeing, a creature that wore the approximate shape of a human woman but was fundamentally wrong in almost every aspect of its appearance. Then she started crawling, not walking, not running, crawling down the hallway toward us with her hands and her knees, moving with a fluidity that human bodies shouldn't achieve, moving with a speed that shouldn't have been possible given that she was on all fours. Her head was twisted at an angle that would have broken a living human's neck. Her mouth was open, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous and too sharp. She was making a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a moan, something that existed between those vocalizations, something that made my eardrums hurt from the sheer rawness of the frequency. We ran, all of us, Tom and Kylie and Marcus and Rachel and myself, all scrambling down the stairs as fast as we could move, our feet loud on the wooden steps, our breathing ragged with panic and adrenaline and pure, primal terror. The comment section was exploding. Rachel told me later that the engagement metrics had spiked to over 500,000 concurrent viewers in the span of seconds. Everyone was sharing the video. Everyone was watching in real time as we fled from something that shouldn't exist. The woman reached the top of the stairs just as we made it to the bottom. I turned back long enough to see her beginning to descend, crawling down the stairs with that impossible fluidity. Her wrong face studying us with that hunger. Her nightgown trailing blood behind her like a path, marking her descent into our reality. We made it outside. We made it to the car. We drove away from the house in New Hope with the live stream still running, with hundreds of thousands of people watching, with the terrifying footage of that creature captured in perfect clarity on Marcus's camera equipment. As we drove, Rachel was scrolling through the comments, reading what people were saying. Most of them still thought it was a prank. Most of them assumed we hired an actor to play a ghost, that the whole thing was an elaborate bit of content creation designed to build buzz and engagement. But some people knew better. Some people recognized something in that footage that made them understand this wasn't acting. Some people knew what we'd seen. And then, about 15 minutes after we left the house, Rachel got a notification. The live stream was being flagged. YouTube and TikTok were taking down the video, removing it from the platforms, citing violations of content policy regarding staged harmful content. But before they could remove it completely, before the platforms could suppress the evidence, the video had already gone viral. It had already been shared millions of times. Screenshots had been taken. The image of that pale woman crawling down the stairs had been immortalized in memes and shared across social media in a way that couldn't be undone or taken back. We drove straight to the police station. We told them what had happened. We showed them the footage that we saved before the platforms removed it. The officers seemed skeptical at first, but then something changed in their demeanor. One of the older officers, a man named Detective Morrison, asked me to describe the woman in detail. As I described her appearance, her movements, her impossible physiology, something shifted in his expression. He told us to wait in the station. He made some phone calls. He spoke to other officers in hushed tones. 20 minutes later, we were in an interrogation room, and Detective Morrison was asking us detailed questions about exactly where in the house we encountered the woman, what time it happened, whether any of us had touched her or made physical contact. His questions were specific and precise in a way that suggested he was trying to match our description to something in a database, something in a file, something that he already knew about but couldn't quite believe we encountered. Finally, he told us something that made my blood run cold. He said that 4 years ago, a woman named Elena Vasquez had been reported missing from that exact house. She'd been a caretaker, hired to maintain the property while the owners were out of the country. She'd been reported missing by her family after she stopped responding to messages. When the police investigated, they found Elena's belongings still in the house, her car parked in the driveway, but no sign of Elena herself. Her body was never found. The case went cold. She was officially declared dead 5 years ago based on evidence that suggested foul play, but the mystery of what happened to her was never solved. The description I'd given matched Elena perfectly. The detective showed me photographs of her, and I recognized her face immediately, recognized the dark hair and the pale skin and the fear in her eyes that was visible even in still photographs. This was the creature we encountered. This was what had been in that house. This was what was crawling down the stairs toward us in the darkness. But the most terrifying part came when Detective Morrison told us about the comments on our live stream. He said that police had been monitoring the video before it was removed, analyzing the comment section in real time. They found something unsettling in the stream of messages. They found comments from people describing Elena as their friend, their sister, their loved one, claiming that the pale woman in our video looked exactly like people they knew who had gone missing years ago from different locations, different states, different decades. Comments from people describing encounters with this same creature in different forms, wearing different faces, but always with that same impossible physiology, always with that same hunger. The detective showed me the data. There were at least 30 cases in the Northeast region alone of people going missing from supposedly haunted locations. In each case, there was a moment in the hours before the disappearance when someone reported seeing a pale, wrongly proportioned figure. In each case, The creature seemed to wear the face of someone who had been reported missing from that location years or decades before. I spent the months since that night trying to understand what we encountered. The house in New Hope was never rented to anyone else. The owners eventually sold it, and the new owners reported that they refused to allow anyone to explore the second floor, claiming it was structurally unsound. The footage of our live stream is still available on various mirror websites and archive sites, still being shared and analyzed and debated. Some people still believe it as a prank, but law enforcement agencies have quietly started analyzing the data, trying to understand the pattern, trying to determine where this creature comes from and what it wants. I then learned that Elena Vasquez wasn't the first person to go missing from that house. There is evidence suggesting people disappeared there in 1973, in 1941, in 1892. Each time, there were reports of a pale woman, a creature wearing the face of a previous victim, crawling through the house, hunting for something or someone. I hated to work since that night. I can't create content anymore. I can't look at a camera without remembering Marcus filming that creature, without remembering the moment when something impossible became real and was broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people in real time. The TikTok house haunting became the most viewed video in our channel as history, but we never posted anything else. The account went dormant. We all went separate ways, trying to move on, trying to forget what we've seen. But I can forget. None of us can. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder about the people who watched that live stream and recognized the creature as someone they'd known. I wonder if those people are now missing too. I wonder if the creature was hunting through the comment section, identifying people who might be in its territory, people who might be vulnerable, people who might be the next face it would wear when it crawled down another set of stairs in another supposedly haunted house. The pale woman is still there. I'm certain of it. Still in the house in New Hope. Still waiting for the next group of people to come exploring. Still hungry for faces it can steal and memories it can wear. And I just started noticing something terrifying. Paranormal content creators keep booking that house. Different channels, different creators, different groups of people, all of them renting that location to create content. All of them somehow not knowing or not believing or not caring that something terrifying lives there, something that has been patient for hundreds of years, something that feeds on human attention and fear and live stream engagement. So I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Have you ever watched a live stream or a video where something felt genuinely wrong? Something that seemed too real to be acting? Something that made your instincts tell you that you were witnessing something true and terrifying being broadcast in real time? Have you ever seen footage that made you wonder if what you were watching wasn't entertainment but documentation? Have you ever felt that cold certainty that the people on screen were in genuine danger? Write your answer in the comments below. Tell me about videos you've seen that terrified you. Tell me about live streams that felt real in a way that no prank could feel real. Tell me if you've ever watched something and known, with absolute certainty, that the creators were capturing something that should never have been captured. Something that should have remained hidden in the darkness. Something that was using their broadcast to reach out into the world beyond the screen. Because I need to know if what we experienced was unique, or if there are other creators out there, other people with cameras, other groups of friends capturing moments when something impossible breaks through into our reality. I need to know if the creature is still hunting through live streams and social media, using our platforms, using our desire for engagement and attention and viral fame, to find its way into more houses, more locations, more places where it can wait and hunger and crawl. Story 2. Green Man is returned. I'm going to tell you something that will change the way you look at your windows at night. Something terrifying that is happening right now in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Something that started 3 months ago and hasn't stopped. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you understand what I experienced. What we all experienced. Because the Green Man has returned. And he is asking for something we can't refuse. The first time I heard about it, I dismissed it as an urban legend. You know the type. Every region has one. Stories about creatures that haunt the woods, shapeshifters that hide in basements, mysterious figures that appear in mirrors. Pittsburgh suburbs had their own version. An old, creepy story about a faceless figure that people called Charlie No Face. The legend said he was burned in an accident decades ago, that his face was completely gone, and now he wandered the streets at night looking for something. Looking for people. Most people thought it was just a scary story to tell kids around a campfire. Nobody believed it was real. I didn't believe it was real either. Then one night in late July, my neighbor knocked on my door at almost midnight. Her name was Rachel, and she looked absolutely terrified. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. She told me something had happened. Something horrifying. She said there was a figure at her back window. A person, but not quite a person. She said it had no face. Just smooth skin where a face should be. And it was knocking, tap, 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 against the glass. Over and over. I thought she was having some kind of breakdown. A panic attack. Maybe she had seen something in the shadows and her mind had filled in the terrifying details. That's what happens when people are scared. Our brains are wired to see threats everywhere, even when there are none. I tried to calm her down. I told her it was probably just a trick of the light. Maybe a deer or a raccoon. Maybe someone playing a prank. But then she told me the most chilling detail. The figure at her window had been asking her to turn off the lights. Not in words. Rachel said she couldn't to explain how she knew what it wanted. But she knew. The faceless figure was knocking and somehow communicating. Asking, begging, pleading for her to turn off the lights in her house. I stayed with her that night. We sat in her living room with all the lights on, the doors locked, the windows checked. Nothing happened. By morning, Rachel had convinced herself that she had imagined the whole thing. She went to work and tried to forget about it, but I knew something had scared her badly enough to come to my door at midnight. Rachel wasn't the type of person who got scared easily. She had lived alone for years. She was practical, grounded. Whatever she saw that night had terrified her. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I researched the Charlie No-Face story. I wanted to know if there was any truth to it. What I found was unsettling enough to make my stomach turn. Charlie No-Face was real. There actually was a person in Pittsburgh, this history, who had been severely burned in an accident in the 1950s. His name was Jack Layton. He had been electrocuted by high-voltage power lines. His entire face had been burned away. The wounds were so severe and so disfiguring that he became a local legend. People called him the Green Man because his scarred skin had a greenish tint from the burns. He wandered the roads around Pittsburgh at night, and people claimed to see him frequently. Kids would dare each other to go look for him in the darkness. The Green Man had become a famous urban legend in that region. But Jack Layton had died in 1984. 40 years ago, the creepy legend had faded. Most people younger than 50 had never even heard of it. It was a forgotten story, something that had been replaced by newer, shinier urban legends. The Green Man had become a footnote in local history, until 3 months ago. That is when people started reporting it. At first, it was just a few sightings. Neighbors would mention seeing a figure in the dark with no face. An unsettling silhouette. Most people assumed it was someone wearing a mask or makeup. But then the reports changed. People started saying that the figure was knocking on their windows, and it was asking them to turn off the lights. The pattern was always the same. Late at night, between 11 and 2 in the morning, residents would hear a tap, tap, tap at their windows. Some people described it as patient, like the figure could wait all night. Others said it seemed desperate, increasingly frantic, as if whatever was knocking desperately needed the lights to go out. And when people looked at their windows, they would see it. A figure, humanoid, but where its face should be, there was nothing. Just smooth, greenish skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing. The terrifying part was that everyone who encountered it reported the same thing. They somehow knew what it wanted, not through words or sounds. Just a knowing, a communication that bypassed language entirely. The faceless figure wanted the lights turned off. Lights in the house, lights in the bedroom, all of them. It wanted darkness. I tried to tell myself this was mass hysteria, a collective delusion. One person saw something they couldn't explain, started talking about the Green Man legend, and suddenly everyone was primed to see the same thing. That is how our minds work. We look for patterns. We believe what we expect to believe. But the reports kept coming. More people, different neighborhoods, different descriptions of the same terrifying phenomenon. And they all had something in common. Every person who reported seeing the faceless figure said that after it appeared, something horrible happened when they turned off the lights. That is what really disturbed me. That is what made me understand that something genuinely creepy and horrifying was happening in the Pittsburgh suburbs. One woman turned off her lights after seeing the figure at her window. She said that in the darkness, she heard breathing. Breathing that wasn't her own. Breathing that seemed to come from inside her house. When she turned the lights back on, there was nothing. Her house was empty, but she could smell something. A smell like burned meat, like charred flesh, the smell of someone who had been severely burned. Another man reported that he turned off the lights after seeing the faceless figure outside his window. He said that in the darkness, he became paralyzed with fear. Completely unable to move, he could feel a presence in the room with him, something standing over his bed. He said it felt cold, impossibly cold, like death itself had entered his bedroom. He forced himself to turn the lights back on, and whatever was there vanished instantly. A family in Penn Hill said that their young daughter saw the figure at her window. She was terrified and didn't understand what she was seeing. The parents told her to ignore it and go to bed. That night, after they turned off the lights, their daughter started screaming. Not words, just primal, desperate screaming. When they turned the lights back on, she was incoherent, traumatized. She refused to sleep in her room for weeks after that. The stories kept spreading through the neighborhood, through social media, through late-night conversations. People were terrified. Windows started going dark early. Some residents left their lights on 24 hours a day. Others boarded up their windows. Some families simply left. They packed up their houses and moved away from the Pittsburgh suburbs, away from whatever was happening there. The fear was spreading like a disease. And then it came to my house. It was a Tuesday night in October. I was lying in bed reading when I heard it. Tap, 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 on my bedroom window. My entire body went rigid. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. That sound, that terrible, patient knocking. It was real. It was happening to me. I forced myself to look toward the window. There was a figure outside, barely visible in the darkness. It was standing perfectly still, staring at my window. No, not staring. It had no eyes to stare with, but I could feel it looking at me. That was the most horrifying part. I could feel its attention on me like a physical force. Even without eyes, even without a face, it was watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Tap, 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 again. That knocking, patient, methodical, like it would knock all night if it had to. And I understood, just like Rachel had understood, just like everyone else had understood. The faceless figure was asking me to turn off the lights. It was communicating directly into my mind. Turn off the lights. Let me in. Let me in the darkness. Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to do it. The fear was overwhelming. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give out. I was absolutely terrified. But there was something else too. Something strange. A compulsion. A pull. A deep, almost irresistible urge to do what the figure wanted. To turn off the lights. To invite the darkness. I realized then that this was how it worked. This was how the Green Man hunted. It came to your window. It asked for the lights to be turned off. And if you did it, if you surrendered to the darkness, something horrifying would happen. Something that all the people before me had experienced in their own ways. Terror, paralysis, burning sensation, something that couldn't exist in the light but thrived in darkness. I turned off my bedroom light. The moment darkness filled the room, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. I could hear breathing that wasn't to mine. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere. From inside the room, from outside, from the walls themselves. The breathing was loud, wet, like someone with severe lung damage trying to pull air into ruined lungs. Then I felt something in the room with me. I couldn't see it. The darkness was absolute, but I could feel its presence. Cold, wrong, terrifying. It was standing at the foot of my bed. I knew this with complete certainty, even though I couldn't see a single thing. The presence was so overwhelming that it didn't matter if I could see it or not. I knew it was there. I reached out in the darkness and flipped the light switch on the wall next to my bed. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't grasp it. When the light came on, the presence vanished instantly. But my window was still covered by something. Something dark, something that looked like burned skin pressing against the glass. And I could still hear the breathing outside. Still, the knocking stopped. The figure was gone from my window. But I knew it wasn't finished with me. I knew this was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I left all the lights on in my house. Every single one. My electric bill was going to be astronomical. But I didn't care. As long as there was light, I felt safe. As long as there was light, the terrifying presence couldn't enter my home. But something had changed inside me. Something had been altered by that encounter in the darkness. I started seeing things in my peripheral vision. Shadows that moved against the light. Moments where I thought I saw smooth, greenish skin in reflections. I started hearing that breathing at random times during the day. It was fading, distant, but it was always there now. Part of me, connected to me. I researched what I could find about the original Green Man, about Jack Layton. According to the stories, he had lived in the forests around Pittsburgh. He had been rejected by society because of his appearance. He had lived in isolation, avoiding light whenever possible because people found him too horrifying to look at. He had died in 1984, but the legend said he died alone in a cave, in total darkness, finally at peace with his disfigurement because there was no one around to see it. In the complete darkness, he was no longer a monster. He was just a man. But the story didn't end with his death. The legend said that his spirit remained in the Pittsburgh suburbs, that on certain nights, his presence would return, asking people to join him in the darkness, to turn off the lights and experience what he had experienced: isolation, acceptance, the peace of darkness where no one could see you and judge you and fear you. The terrifying part was that more people were turning off their lights. I started hearing reports from neighbors about residents who had finally surrendered. They turned off all their lights and didn't turn them back on. Some of them were still in their homes, living in complete darkness during the day and night. Others had vanished, disappeared. The police couldn't find any explanation. The houses were locked. There were no signs of struggle. The people were simply gone. I realized that something was spreading, something contagious. The Green Man wasn't just appearing at windows anymore. He was calling to people, reaching into their minds, asking them to join him. And some of them were answering that call. They were choosing darkness, choosing to turn off the lights and never turn them back on. I packed a bag. I decided I was leaving the Pittsburgh suburbs. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't listen to that breathing in my mind. I couldn't resist the pull toward darkness for much longer. I knew that eventually I would give in. I would turn off all the lights and do whatever the Green Man wanted. I didn't want to find out what that meant. As I was loading my car with my belongings, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. At my front door this time. The knocking had moved locations. The figure was directly asking me to open the door. And I understood the message clearly. Turn off the lights. Open the door. Let me in. Join me in the darkness where we can finally be alone together. My hands moved toward the light switch. I could feel the compulsion overwhelming me, but I forced myself to get in my car instead. I drove away from my house without looking back. I drove out of the Pittsburgh suburbs as fast as I could. But here, it's the thing about that kind of fear, that kind of terrifying encounter. You can outrun it. You can escape it by changing your location. Because it's not just a place. It is not just a phenomenon that exists in one specific area. The Green Man had marked me. He had touched my mind in the darkness. And now he was with me wherever I went. I moved 3 states away. I live with all the lights on now, 24 hours a day. My electricity bill is insane. I look like I am paranoid and unstable. And I'm terrified because every night I hear that breathing. Every night I see those shadows moving at the edges of my vision. Every night I have to fight the overwhelming urge to turn off the lights. I know what will happen if I do. I know that the Green Man will be waiting in the darkness. And I know that I want to be able to resist him for much longer. Eventually, I'll give in. Eventually, I'll surrender to the darkness. And then I'll join all the others who have already made that choice. The ones living in complete darkness in their homes throughout the Pittsburgh suburbs. The ones who have become part of something bigger, something terrifying, something that feeds on the darkness and spreads through the fear of those who encounter it. The Green Man has returned, and he is not just looking for the people of Pittsburgh anymore. He is everywhere now, spreading through the darkness, appearing at windows, asking for the lights to be turned off. And every person who sees him, every person who hears that knocking, becomes infected with the need to obey. I am telling you this because I need you to understand something. The Green Man is real. The terrifying, faceless figure isn't just a legend. It's something that exists in the spaces between light and darkness. Something that has been hungry for decades. And it is spreading. More sightings are being reported every week. Not just in Pittsburgh anymore, but in other cities, other suburbs, other places where people live with their lights on, feeling safe, never knowing that something terrible might be waiting just beyond the glass. So here is my question for you. When you go to bed tonight and turn off your lights, will you hear the knocking? Will you feel that presence in your room with you? And if you do, will you have the strength to turn the lights back on before you surrender to the darkness? Write your answer in the comments below. Story 3. Whispers Beneath the Bridge. The voices coming from beneath the Girard Avenue bridge knew my mother's exact tone when she was disappointed in me, and that is how I knew something was deeply, horrifyingly wrong. I was exploring the old sewer tunnel system under Philadelphia with two friends, documenting abandoned infrastructure for our urban exploration channel. We had done dozens of these trips before, empty factories, forgotten subway stations, derelict hospitals, but nothing prepared us for what waited in the darkness beneath that bridge. Nothing could have prepared us for the terrifying moment when the shadows started speaking our names. It began on a cold October evening. The three of us, Marcus, Jessica, and myself, descended through a rusted maintenance hatch near the Schuylkill River. The tunnel below was a relic from the 1800s, part of Philadelphia's original drainage system that the city had sealed off decades ago. Our flashlights cut through the thick darkness as we made our way deeper into the network of passages. The air smelled like wet stone and decay. Water dripped steadily from the arched ceiling, creating an eerie rhythm that echoed through the tunnels. Everything felt normal at first. Creepy, yes, but normal creepy. The kind of unsettling atmosphere you expect in abandoned underground spaces. Graffiti covered some walls. Rusted pipes jutted from others. Our boots splashed through shallow puddles that reflected our lights like black mirrors. We recorded everything, narrating for our audience, explaining the history of the tunnels. Then Jessica stopped walking. She held up her hand for silence, her face suddenly pale in the flashlight beam. We froze, listening. At first, I heard nothing but the constant drip of water and our own breathing. Then it came, a whisper, faint, distant, but unmistakable. It was calling a name, Jessica's full name, Jessica Marie Holloway. Not just Jessica, her complete legal name, middle name included. A name only family used. The voice sounded exactly like her grandmother. The same slight rasp, the same gentle cadence, but her grandmother lived in Pittsburgh, 280 miles away. There was no possible way her voice could be down here in this dark, forgotten tunnel beneath Philadelphia. Yet we all heard it clearly. The whisper drifted from somewhere deeper in the darkness, beyond the reach of our lights. Jessica's hand started shaking. She told us her grandmother had died 3 weeks earlier. The funeral was still fresh in her mind. Hearing that beloved voice, so precise and familiar, coming from the shadows was more than unsettling. It was horrifying. It felt like violation, like something had reached into her memories and pulled out the most intimate details to use against her. Marcus wanted to leave immediately. So did I, but Jessica was already walking toward the sound, drawn by some instinct stronger than fear, some desperate need to understand what could possibly recreate her grandmother's voice so perfectly. We followed because leaving her alone down there was unthinkable. Our flashlights bobbed as we moved deeper into the tunnel system, following the whispers. The passage narrowed. The ceiling dropped lower. We had to duck in places where ancient bricks had shifted and cracked. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, thick and tangible. Then I heard my own name. The sound stopped me cold. It was my mother's voice, speaking with that particular disappointed tone she used when I had let her down. She spoke my full name, including the middle name I never used, the one I actually hated and never told anyone about. But my mother was in New Jersey. She was at home, probably watching television, completely unaware that her son was crawling through dangerous tunnels beneath Philadelphia. Yet her voice surrounded me in that enclosed space, coming from every direction at once. The acoustics made it impossible to pinpoint a source. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the very darkness that pressed against our small circles of light. Marcus heard his voice next. His father, a man who had been dead for 7 years. The voice called to him with urgent familiarity, using private nicknames that only his family knew. I watched Marcus, his face transform from skepticism to pure terror in seconds. Something was very wrong here. Something beyond explanation. 3 separate voices, 3 deceased relatives, all calling us by our full legal names in voices so accurate they could only come from genuine memory or something with access to our deepest thoughts. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Our lights revealed a circular room with multiple passages branching off in different directions. Water pooled in the center, perhaps 3 feet deep, black as oil and perfectly still despite the constant dripping from above. The walls were covered in strange markings. Not graffiti. These were old, carved deep into the brick and stone. Symbols I did not recognize, patterns that hurt to look at too long. They seemed to shift and writhe in our peripheral vision, though they remained static when viewed directly. The whispers grew louder. Now they came from all around us, overlapping, creating a chilling chorus of familiar voices speaking unfamiliar words. My mother's voice mixed with Jessica's grandmother and Marcus's father, all calling our names, all beckoning us deeper, all promising things that made no sense. The comfort of home, the warmth of family, rest after long struggle. The words were right, but the meaning felt twisted, corrupted, like something had learned human speech but failed to understand human emotion. Jessica stepped toward the water. I grabbed her arm, but she pulled away with surprising strength. Her eyes were glazed, unfocused. She was listening to something we could not hear clearly. Private words meant only for her. The whispers had changed tactics. They were no longer just calling names. They were having conversations, one-sided dialogues that only the intended target could fully comprehend. I shouted at her, trying to break whatever spell had taken hold. My voice sounded small and insignificant against the chorus of whispers. Marcus grabbed her other arm, and together we tried to pull her back from the water. Instead, she fought us, not violently, but with a dreamy, distant resistance. Her lips moved, responding to questions we could not hear, answering a grandmother who was not really there. Then Marcus screamed. Something had touched him. In the darkness beyond our lights, something physical had made contact. He spun around, his flashlight cutting wild arcs through the chamber. We all saw it for just a second. A shadow darker than the surrounding darkness. A shape that was almost human but wrong in proportions I could not quite define. It moved with fluid grace back into one of the side passages, leaving only the echo of displaced air and a smell like turned earth and mildew. The whispers stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the voices. In that terrifying quiet, we could hear other sounds. Movement in the passages around us. Not footsteps exactly, more like something dragging, something heavy and wet sliding across stone. The sounds came from multiple directions. We were surrounded. We ran. I do not remember making the decision. Survival instinct took over. We splashed through the central pool, water soaking our legs with shocking cold. We chose a passage at random and sprinted into the darkness, our flashlights bouncing wildly, creating disorienting strobes of light and shadow. Behind us, the dragging sounds grew faster, closer. Whatever shared these tunnels with us was pursuing. The passage twisted and turned. We lost all sense of direction. Down here, every tunnel looked the same. Wet brick walls, arched ceilings, endless darkness. We could be going deeper or heading toward the surface. There was no way to tell. The sounds behind us grew louder, more numerous. It felt like dozens of things were moving through the tunnels, all converging on our position. Jessica fell. She went down hard, her flashlight skittering across the wet floor and coming to rest against the wall. In its beam, we saw something that made my blood freeze. Handprints, dozens of them, hundreds, covering every surface of the tunnel walls around us. Small hands, child-sized, pressed into the stone as if the brick had been soft when touched. Some were old, barely visible depressions. Others looked fresh, recent. The horrifying implication was clear. We were not the first to come down here. We were not the first to hear the whispers. I pulled Jessica to her feet. Her knee was bleeding, but adrenaline kept her moving. We ran harder, pushing through exhaustion and fear. The whispers started again, but different now. Angry, demanding. The voices of our loved ones twisted into something hateful and cruel. They screamed our names. They cursed us. They promised terrible things if we did not stop running. If we did not turn around and return to that chamber. Marcus saw the light first. Natural light, dim and gray, but unmistakably from the surface. We scrambled toward it, climbing over debris and broken pipes, clawing our way up a partially collapsed section of tunnel. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough to squeeze through, but it led to a drainage culvert that opened onto the riverbank. We emerged into the night air, gasping and filthy, our clothes soaked and torn. The sounds from the tunnel faded behind us. The whispers died away. We were back in the normal world. The city lights of Philadelphia glowed around us. Traffic hummed on nearby streets. Everything was ordinary again. But we were changed, fundamentally altered by what we had experienced in that darkness. We never went back. We deleted all the footage from that night. We never spoke about it publicly. What could we say that would not sound insane? But privately, between the three of us, we tried to understand what had happened. We researched the history of those tunnels. What we found was deeply disturbing. In 1873, a section of the old sewer system had collapsed during construction. 17 workers were trapped. The city had tried to rescue them for 3 days before declaring it too dangerous. They sealed the tunnels and left those men to die in the darkness. No bodies were ever recovered. No memorial was ever built. The city simply covered it up and moved on. But there was more. Over the past 150 years, dozens of people had gone missing near that bridge. Urban explorers, homeless individuals seeking shelter, teenagers on dares. The pattern was consistent but ignored. People entered the tunnels and never returned. The few who did come back told stories of whispers, voices calling their names, shadows that moved with purpose. Most were dismissed as drug users or attention seekers. Jessica started having nightmares 2 days after our escape. In her dreams, her grandmother stands in that circular chamber, calling her name, asking why she abandoned her in the darkness. Marcus hears his father, his voice sometimes when he is alone at night, asking where he went, begging him to come back. The voices are not recordings in their minds. They are interactive. They respond to thoughts. They know things that should be impossible to know. I researched further, going deeper into Philadelphia, this hidden history. I found references in old newspapers to something the workers called the hollow choir, a phenomenon reported in the early tunnel systems where voices would echo in patterns that seemed almost intentional, almost linguistic. The articles suggested that something existed in the deep earth beneath Philadelphia long before the city was built, something that learned to mimic human speech by listening to the dying words of trapped workers, something that fed on loneliness and fear and the desperate human need for connection. The tunnel system remains accessible. The same maintenance hatch we used is still there, still unlocked. People still go down there, drawn by urban legends and the thrill of exploration. Some of them hear the whispers. Some of them never come back. The city knows. They have to know. But admitting the truth would mean acknowledging that something impossible exists beneath their streets. Something that wears the voices of the dead like masks. It has been 6 months since that night. The three of us have started hearing the whispers above ground. Faint at first, easy to dismiss as imagination or stress. But they are getting louder, more frequent. My mother's voice calls to me from empty rooms, from dark corners, from the spaces between sleeping and waking. It knows my schedule. It knows my fears. It knows everything I told those shadows in my moment of terror when I thought I would die in that tunnel. I think something followed us out. Or maybe we brought something back with us. Some fragment of that darkness that now lives in our minds, growing stronger, learning from us, preparing for something I cannot quite understand but deeply fear. The whispers are patient. They've waited in that darkness for over a century. They can wait a little longer. Last week, I woke up at 3 a.m. to find muddy handprints on my bedroom floor. Small hands, child-sized, leading from my door to the foot of my bed. There was no mud anywhere else in my apartment. No explanation for how they got there, but I recognized the pattern from the tunnel walls. Whatever waits beneath the Girard Avenue Bridge is not bound by those tunnels anymore. It is here now, in the world above, learning, adapting, using the voices of people we love to hide what it really is. And I think it is hungry for more than just fear. If you heard your mother's voice calling your name from a place she could never be, would you follow it into the darkness, or would you run? Write your answer in the comments below. Story 4. Oil City Doppelganger. I saw my wife die twice, once in real life, and once before it happened. This is the story of Oil City, Pennsylvania, and the terrifying phenomenon that turned a quiet industrial town into a nightmare where death announces itself through a horrifying and impossible duplicate. What I'm about to tell you defies every rational explanation I've tried to construct. And I need you to listen carefully because what happened there is still happening, and it is spreading. Oil City sits nestled in the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, a forgotten town built on oil wells and broken dreams. Population under 9,000. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where traffic lights blink yellow at midnight, where the most exciting thing that happens is when a new dollar store opens on Main Street. I moved there with my wife Sarah 6 years ago because the housing was cheap and my job as a structural engineer could be done remotely. We thought we'd found paradise in obscurity. We were terribly, horrifyingly wrong. The first disturbing incident happened on a Tuesday in March, and I remember the exact date because it was the day my understanding of reality began to crack. My neighbor, an older gentleman named Frank DeLuca, knocked on my door around 2 in the afternoon with a terrified expression on his weathered face. I could see the fear etched into every line, the unsettling panic radiating from him like heat from a furnace. He told me something so creepy and impossible that I laughed at first. He said he'd just seen his daughter Maria standing in his front yard, waving at him through the kitchen window. Except Maria lived in Cleveland, 300 miles away. Except he called her phone and she answered, confused, saying she was at work. never left her office all day. The eerie part was this: the figure in the yard looked absolutely identical to Maria. Down to the way she moved, the shape of her hands, the specific tilt of her head when she smiled. Perfect in every detail. And then, while Frank was still staring at her through the window, the figure simply faded. Not ran away, not walked off. Faded like a photograph left too long in sunlight, becoming transparent, dissolving into nothing, vanishing into the afternoon air like a chilling and impossible ghost. I tried to reassure Frank. I suggested it was a trick of light, a hallucination brought on by stress, anything rational and explainable. But deep down, something about his story unsettled me in ways I couldn't articulate. There was genuine terror in his voice, the kind of pure fear that comes only from witnessing something that violates the fundamental rules of how the world should work. I gave him a drink of water and watched him leave, trying to convince myself that this was an isolated incident, a strange coincidence that could be easily forgotten. I was wrong, horribly, nightmarishly wrong. The second incident came 3 days later, and this time it hit much closer to home. Sarah came home from her book club meeting around 6 in the evening, still wearing her dark blue dress and carrying her leather purse. I was working in my home office, absorbed in blueprints, barely looking up when I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She went into the bedroom. The door closed. Nothing unusual, nothing scary, just a normal Tuesday night in a small Pennsylvania town. But then my phone rang. It was Sarah, calling from her car. She said she was just leaving the grocery store on the other side of town, that she decided to pick up some items for dinner. She asked if I needed anything. Her voice was normal, cheerful, completely ordinary. I felt ice spread through my chest, a creeping and terrifying sensation that something was fundamentally wrong with the universe. I told her to come straight home. I hung up without explaining why. I went upstairs, my heart pounding with dread, my hands shaking with fear and adrenaline. I opened the bedroom door slowly, half expecting nothing, half expecting something horrifying. What I found was almost worse than finding nothing at all. The figure sitting on the edge of our bed looked exactly like my wife. Every detail was perfect. The way her dark hair fell across her shoulders, the specific shade of her lipstick, the small scar on her left hand from a kitchen accident years ago. Even the way she held herself, that particular posture that was uniquely Sarah, was replicated perfectly. But when I stepped into the room, the figure looked up at me, and I saw something that made my blood freeze and my stomach convulse with pure, primal terror. Her eyes were wrong. They were Sarah's eyes, the exact same green, the exact same shape, but there was nothing behind them. No recognition, no warmth, no person inhabiting that face. Just an empty, hollow stare that belonged to something that was mimicking humanity but didn't understand what it meant to be human. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand frozen in that doorway staring at my wife, his face and something else wearing it like a mask. The figure tilted its head, an uncanny and unsettling movement, studying me with that dead, vacant gaze. Its mouth opened slowly, and I heard Sarah's voice, but wrong, like an actress doing an impression. All the natural inflections missing, all the warmth gone, replaced by something robotic and terrifying. It said my name, just my name, nothing else, just a single word in my wife's voice delivered in a way that no living, breathing human would ever speak. I ran. Pure instinct took over, and I bolted down the stairs and out of the house. I stood in my driveway, gasping for breath, trying to process what I just witnessed, trying to convince myself that I imagined it, that the stress and fear had triggered some kind of hallucination, that the darkness of my own mind was playing tricks on me. But I knew better. Deep in my bones, in some ancient part of my brain that recognizes real danger, I knew that what I'd seen was real and terrifying and absolutely impossible. Sarah pulled into the driveway 5 minutes later, groceries in her arms, confused by the fact that I was standing outside in the cold without a jacket, my face probably white as a sheet, my hands still trembling. I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen. How do you tell your wife that something wearing her face has been sitting on your bed? So I didn't. I just held her, feeling her warmth, her realness, the genuine presence of the woman I loved, and I tried to quiet the screaming panic in my mind. Over the next 2 weeks, the horrifying incidents multiplied like a spreading infection. I stopped counting after the 15th report. People all over Oil City were seeing duplicates. A woman saw her mother standing in her basement, perfect in every detail except for that eerie, empty stare. A teenager saw his best friend at the mall, called out to him, but the figure simply walked away without responding, moving with an odd, stilted gait that seemed almost practiced. An elderly man reported seeing his late wife, dead for 3 years, standing in his garage at midnight, smiling that hollow smile with those vacant eyes. The truly terrifying and undeniable pattern emerged when the accidents began. Frank DeLuca saw his daughter Maria, his duplicate, on a Thursday afternoon. By that evening, Maria had been hit by a delivery truck while crossing a street in Cleveland. She survived but spent 6 weeks in the hospital with a broken leg and internal injuries. A woman named Patricia saw her sister, as doppelganger, in her kitchen on a Sunday morning. That same afternoon, her sister's car suffered complete brake failure on a highway. She crashed into a guardrail but miraculously walked away with minor injuries. A man named Derek saw his son, his duplicate, outside his office building. The next day, that same son fell down a flight of stairs at work and fractured 3 ribs and cracked his collarbone. Every single time, without exception, the person whose duplicate had been sighted suffered a serious accident within 12 to 48 hours. It was as though something was announcing death before delivering it. As though this thing, whatever it was using these horrifying duplicates as warnings, or maybe as some kind of dark and terrifying countdown, preparing people for the moment when their luck would run out and the universe would finally collect the debt that seeing their own doppelganger seemed to represent. The town descended into a collective nightmare of paranoia and fear. People stopped going out alone. Families stayed locked inside their homes, drawing all the curtains, turning on every light, creating little islands of desperate safety in a world that had become fundamentally creepy and unsettling. Accidents continued, but they became worse. The injuries grew more severe. A woman saw her husband, his duplicate. 3 days later, he suffered a sudden heart attack while jogging. He survived, but barely. A teenager saw his girlfriend, his doppelganger, staring at him through his bedroom window. That weekend, she was diagnosed with a fast-growing brain tumor that doctors said they somehow missed on her previous scans. I became obsessed with research. I spent hours on the internet, searching for explanations, digging through folklore and mythology, trying to find any historical precedent for what was happening in Oil City. That is when I discovered the concept of the doppelganger, and the ancient, unsettling belief that seeing your own double was a harbinger of death, a supernatural announcement that your time on Earth was running out. But this was different. This was worse. This wasn't people seeing their own duplicates. This was people seeing other people as duplicates, other people as harbingers, other people as death warnings. And the truly horrifying pattern I discovered was this. The more people in Oil City saw duplicates, the more frequent the accidents became, the more severe the injuries escalated, as though something was accelerating, building towards something catastrophic and terrifying, some kind of dark crescendo that was approaching with mathematical inevitability. Sarah saw her duplicate on an ordinary Friday morning in April. I watched it happen. We were driving to the grocery store, taking the same route we always took, heading down Route 8 toward town. Sarah was talking about a book she'd been reading, her voice comfortable and familiar, filling the car with the normalcy and warmth that I desperately needed in that increasingly creepy and nightmarish town. Then she stopped talking. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, her eyes fixed on something ahead of us on the road. Standing in the middle of Route 8, just beyond a curve, was Sarah. Another Sarah, perfect and identical and utterly wrong. She stood motionless in her jeans and green jacket, the exact outfit Sarah was wearing, her hair exactly the same, her posture mirroring my wife, was in every terrifying detail. But those eyes, that empty, hollow, unsettling gaze that belonged to something that had learned to imitate human form but didn't understand what it meant to inhabit one. Sarah slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly on the asphalt. I reached out instinctively, bracing myself against the dashboard. When I looked back up, the duplicate had vanished. Just gone, evaporated into nothing, dissolved into the afternoon like it had never been there at all. But Sarah's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and she was breathing fast, shallow breaths of pure terror. She knew what she'd seen. She knew what it meant. The accident happened the very next day. Sarah was in an accident that wasn't supposed to happen that way. She was hit by a car while crossing the street in downtown Oil City, A simple, ordinary moment during a routine day. She landed on the hood, then the pavement, and despite not being hit at particularly high speed, despite landing in a way that usually results in minor injuries, something went catastrophically wrong. The doctor said her spleen ruptured on impact. The internal bleeding was severe and immediate. She made it to the hospital, but just barely. For 48 hours, I sat in that hospital waiting room, convinced that my wife was going to die, that seeing her duplicate had been the universe announcing that the time we had together was ending. I prayed to gods I didn't to believe in. I made deals with forces I didn't to understand. I would have done anything at all, to undo what had happened. To rewind time to before that horrible moment on Route 8 when we both saw that empty-eyed thing wearing my wife's face. But Sarah survived. Against the odds, against every prediction the first set of doctors made, she survived. She had emergency surgery, spent 5 days in the hospital, and slowly, miraculously, recovered. I held her hand during those dark nights in the hospital, feeling my own tears on my face, wondering why she had been spared when so many others hadn't. She'd been so lucky. The answer came in a way I didn't expect. I was sitting in Sarah's hospital room on the 4th night, exhausted and running on coffee in desperation, when my phone rang. It was Frank DeLuca, my neighbor, the man who first told me about his daughter, his duplicate. His voice was strange, hollow, wrong in a way I recognized immediately. He said he needed to meet me. He said he understood what was happening in Oil City. He said he knew what the duplicates were. I met Frank at the old cemetery outside of town, a place that felt appropriately eerie and unsettling given the conversation I anticipated. He was waiting for me near the entrance, standing in the darkness under trees that blocked out the moonlight, creating deep shadows that seemed to absorb all light and hope. When he spoke, his voice was different from before. It was calmer, but there was something unsettling about that calmness, something that suggested he accepted something terrible about the universe. Frank told me that he'd done research of his own. He found something in the archives of the Oil City Library, something in the historical records that pertained to the land where our town was built. Before it was Oil City, before the oil wells and the industrial development, the land had been home to a small tribe of indigenous people. They'd been forced out, displaced, murdered by settlers, their history erased from the landscape and the collective memory. But they left behind something. A warning, an ancient ritual that they performed to protect themselves from forces that existed in that land. Forces that predated human civilization. Forces that fed on something fundamental to human existence. The duplicates weren't the omens of death, Frank explained in that creepy and measured voice. They were something far worse. They were anchors. They were something that this land, this cursed and hungry place, had learned to create, using the fear and the terror and the accumulated grief of living human beings as raw material. The duplicates appeared to mark people for accidents. Yes, but not random accidents. Accidents that caused trauma, that caused pain, that caused suffering and fear. The land, or whatever dwelled in the land beneath Oil City, was feeding on human suffering. It was using the doppelgangers to set up the feast, to arrange the menu of human agony that it consumed. And the most terrifying realization was this: the more people who survived their marked accidents, the more the land would accelerate its feeding. More duplicates would appear, the accidents would become worse. The pattern would intensify until the entire town was consumed in a cycle of endless, escalating horror and pain that could only end in total annihilation. I asked Frank how he knew all this. He smiled that hollow smile, that empty expression that I learned to recognize and absolutely dread. I realized then that I wasn't talking to Frank DeLuca anymore. I was talking to something wearing his face, something that had replaced him at some point I couldn't determine, something that had learned enough about Frank to answer his phone and fool his family into believing he was still alive. I ran. I drove back to the hospital. I packed Sarah up and we left Oil City that same night, leaving behind everything we owned, leaving behind our house and our jobs and our carefully constructed life. Because I knew that if we stayed, if we remained in that cursed and terrifying place even one day longer, the land beneath the town would eventually claim us both. But here, it's the horrifying truth that I've come to understand in the months since we escaped. I haven't stopped seeing duplicates. Neither has Sarah. We're living in a different town now, 300 miles away, trying to rebuild our lives, trying to convince ourselves that we're safe. But I see myself sometimes standing across parking lots, watching me from crowds, always with that same empty expression, that same hollow gaze. And Sarah has seen me, too, multiple times. They've seen each other as duplicates, which means, according to the horrifying pattern, that accidents should come. They haven't, not yet, but I feel them approaching, a dark presence gathering at the edge of my perception, a terrifying promise that something is coming, something that traveled with us when we left Oil City. Because that is the most unsettling realization of all, the land beneath Oil City ISN, to the source of the horror. It is not contained to that one cursed town. The duplicates, once they've formed, can exist anywhere. They carry the hunger with them. They spread the terror. And somewhere out there, I know with absolute certainty, there are people who, they've never been to Oil City, who, they've never heard of my town, who are beginning to see the faces of their loved ones watching them from crowds, from across rooms, from the shadows of their own homes. The doppelgangers are everywhere now. And every time I see one, every time Sarah mentions one lurking near us, I know that the clock is ticking. An accident is coming. Pain is approaching. The land beneath that small Pennsylvania town has learned to reach beyond its borders, and it is hungry in ways that are impossible to measure, in ways that will never be satisfied. Sarah asked me yesterday if I thought we made a mistake leaving Oil City, if staying might have been better because at least there we would have understood the rules. I couldn't. To answer her, I can. To answer that question because I started to suspect something even more terrifying. What if leaving didn't save us? What if seeing the duplicates, having them mark us, bound us to that place regardless of physical distance? What if we're still in Oil City, even now, even here, miles and miles away, and the land is just playing with us, letting us believe we escaped, preparing something absolutely horrifying for the moment when we finally understand that there is no escape? So I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. I need to know if you've ever seen someone who looked exactly like you, standing where you weren't, standing, appearing in places you couldn't have appeared, watching you with an expression so empty and hollow that it made your soul feel cold. Have you ever seen your own duplicate, or someone else's? Have you ever experienced that moment when the world shifted and the rules of reality bent just slightly, just enough to let something impossible slip through? Write your answer in the comments below. Tell me what you saw. Tell me if it happened before an accident, before something terrible occurred. Tell me everything, because I need to know if this is still just contained to Oil City, or if the spreading has already begun. And please, if you rereading this, and you from Oil City, or you seeing duplicates, or you noticing that accidents keep following strange encounters with perfect copies of your loved ones, get out. Leave. Run as far as you possibly can, because now you know the truth, and knowing the truth might be the only warning you get before something that wears a familiar face finally catches up with you in the darkness. Story 5. Blood Gravel Road. There is a half-mile stretch of road in York County that nobody drives anymore. Not because it is blocked off, not because it is officially forbidden, but because everyone who lives around here understands that some places shouldn't be disturbed. Some roads have histories too dark to ignore. I learned this the hard way. I learned it when I ignored the warnings and drove down that road at night. I learned it when I saw the stones. And I learned it when I realized something terrible was watching me from the darkness beyond the tree line. The road is called Blood Gravel Road. That's what the locals call it. It is a back route that cuts through York County, Pennsylvania, connecting two small towns that most people have never heard of. You could take the main highway and get there in 20 minutes. But Blood Gravel Road cuts through the forest and saves you maybe 5 minutes of driving time. Back before people understood what was happening there, drivers would use it all the time. It was faster. It was rural. It was quiet. It was perfect for someone in a hurry. Then things started changing on that road. Things that didn't have any rational explanation. It started about 7 years ago when a local contractor noticed something creepy during his morning commute. The gravel on Blood Gravel Road was different. Mixed in with the normal gray and tan stones, there were red stones. Bright red, the color of dried blood. But that wasn't the truly unsettling part. These red stones hadn't been there the day before. They appeared overnight, scattered randomly across the entire half-mile stretch, like something had placed them deliberately while everyone was asleep. The contractor mentioned it to friends. They laughed it off. Road maintenance crews probably did some work. Weather probably caused some kind of shift in the gravel. Natural explanations. But here, it's what was terrifying about it. The red stones appeared again the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Every single night, new red stones would appear on Blood Gravel Road. Hundreds of them, sometimes thousands. They would carpet the road in this horrible eerie red color that looked disturbingly like dried blood. People tried to clean them up. A road maintenance crew came out and removed all the red stones. They filled the road with fresh gray gravel. Within 24 hours, the red stones had returned. The same number, the same distribution pattern, like they were being put back by something that couldn't tolerate the road being changed. Like the road itself was demanding these red stones remain. That's when people started noticing the second thing. The animals. Dogs refused to cross Blood Gravel Road. Completely refused. People who lived along the road reported that their dogs would whimper and pull away if they tried to walk them across it. Cats exhibited the same behavior. Birds wouldn't fly over the road during certain times of day. Deer that normally wandered through the forest would take massive detours to avoid crossing that stretch. Even insects seemed to avoid it. People reported that the road had virtually no bug splatter on their windshields when they drove through that section, while everywhere else in York County was coated with insects. The terrifying part was that the animals seemed to know something. They possessed an awareness that humans didn't have. They understood that Blood Gravel Road was dangerous, that something wrong was happening there, that crossing it meant encountering something disturbing and horrifying that they needed to avoid at all costs. After a couple of years, most people just stopped using the road. They added an extra 5 minutes to their drive and took the main highway instead. The road became increasingly isolated. Fewer and fewer cars passed through. The red stones kept appearing every night, and the animals kept refusing to cross. Blood Gravel Road became something that locals whispered about, but nobody investigated. A scary story, a creepy place, a road to avoid. I heard about it probably 1,000 times growing up in York County. Friends would tell the story as if it was a ghost story or an urban legend. Nothing they could actually prove. Nothing that seemed worth taking seriously. I was practical, rational. I didn't believe in curses or haunted roads or any of that superstitious nonsense. So when I took a job as a truck driver covering routes in the region, I made a point of ignoring the warnings. I was pulling a delivery one evening in February when I decided to take Blood Gravel Road as a shortcut. My dispatcher was on my case about being late. My truck was loaded with expensive merchandise that needed to be delivered by morning. I knew the road had a spooky reputation, but I was tired of people acting afraid of things they couldn't explain. I thought I'd prove that it was just a road. Just a stretch of gravel with a bad reputation and nothing else. As I turned onto the entrance to Blood Gravel Road, I immediately noticed the red stones. They covered the entire surface. Thousands of them, glowing red in my headlights like something that was alive and watching me. The red stones were the size of fists, roughly spherical, and they had this unsettling texture that reminded me of something I couldn't quite place. Something organic. Something that shouldn't be turned into stone. My truck, its engine roared as I pressed down on the accelerator. The tires crunched loudly as they rolled over the red stones. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound was horrible, rhythmic, like I was crushing something that was screaming but couldn't make sounds. I was maybe a quarter mile into the road when I noticed the first creepy thing. The animals. There were none, absolutely none. No birds in the trees. No sounds of forest life. Nothing. The forest was silent, completely silent. In February, when trees are bare and animals are hibernating, you still hear some sounds. Wind through branches, distant animal calls, something. But on Blood Gravel Road that night, there was absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that feels wrong, the kind that makes your skin crawl, the kind of eerie quiet that tells you something terrible is paying attention to you. I kept driving. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly. I tried to tell myself that I was being paranoid, that the silence was natural, that the absence of animals made sense this time of year. But my instincts were screaming at me that something was profoundly wrong here. Something disturbing was happening on this road. That's when I saw the shadows. They were moving between the trees on both sides of the road. Shapes, humanoid shapes, but wrong somehow, distorted, moving in ways that didn't seem natural. They would appear for a moment and then vanish back into the darkness of the forest. I told myself it was my imagination, the stress of the job, the unsettling atmosphere of the road making me see things that weren't there. But I could feel their attention, feel them watching my truck as I passed. I pressed down harder on the accelerator. The truck picked up speed. The red stones flew under my wheels. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound became more frantic, more panicked, more like something desperately crying out. I was halfway through the half-mile stretch now. Just a few minutes more and I could be past this terrifying place. Just a little bit further, that's when my truck started acting strange. The engine began to sputter. The rhythm became irregular, like something was interfering with the fuel flow. The speedometer started fluctuating wildly. The needle would spike to 90 miles per hour and then drop to 30. My headlights flickered. On, off, like something invisible was playing with the electrical system. I gripped the steering wheel even tighter. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine noise. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was something else. Something wrong. Something that didn't follow the rules of how vehicles were supposed to work. I had been driving trucks for 15 years. I knew mechanical problems. I knew how engines behaved when something was wrong. This wasn't that. This was something terrifying and inexplicable that was happening to my truck. The shadows in the forest became more aggressive. They were no longer just watching. They were actively pursuing my truck, moving alongside it, keeping pace. I could see them darting between the trees, getting closer to the road with each moment. Getting bolder, getting more frantic, like they were hungry, like my truck represented something they desperately needed. My windshield started to crack. A spider web pattern appeared from the center, spreading outward rapidly. But nothing had hit it. There was no rock, no impact. The windshield was just cracking on its own, like something was pressing on it from the outside with incredible force. The pressure increased. The cracks spread faster, splintering outward across the entire glass. I was maybe 3/4 of the way through the blood gravel stretch now. Another minute, another 200 yards. That was all I needed to make it through. That was all that separated me from safety, from being past this terrifying section of road where nothing made sense and everything was wrong. The engine died. Complete sudden silence. The truck's engine simply stopped. No sputtering, no warning signs, just immediate, total cessation of power. The truck began to slow, coasting, rolling forward on momentum alone while I tried desperately to restart the engine. My foot pressed the ignition button repeatedly. Nothing. The engine was dead. The truck was slowing to a stop in the middle of blood gravel road, surrounded by shadows that were getting closer with each passing second. I felt the shadows arrive at my truck before I saw them. I felt the pressure against the sides of the cab. I felt the weight of their attention. I felt the danger closing in around me. My instinct was to get out and run, to leave the truck and sprint through the darkness toward the end of the road. But something told me that leaving the truck would be the worst possible decision. That the moment I stepped out into the darkness, something terrifying would happen. Something irreversible. I didn't know how I knew this. I just knew. My hands shook as I turned the key again. Please, 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 God, please let this engine start. Every second felt like an eternity. Every moment the shadows were getting closer. I could feel them right outside the windows now. Pressing, pushing, trying to find a way inside the cab. The engine roared to life. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator and the truck lurched forward. The wheels spun on the red gravel for a moment before finding traction. Then we were moving, fast, too fast for a gravel road. But I didn't care. The shadows were falling back, receding into the forest, unable to keep pace with the truck as it accelerated down blood gravel road toward the exit. I was going 70 miles per hour on a road that shouldn't support that speed. The truck was bouncing and skidding, but I kept pushing it faster. Faster. The end of the blood gravel section was visible now. Just a few hundred yards. Just seconds away. I could see the normal gray gravel starting. The transition point. The place where blood gravel road ended and normal roads began. I hit that transition at nearly 80 miles per hour. The truck jerked as the tires transitioned from red stones to normal gravel. In my mirror, I could see the end of blood gravel road receding behind me. The shadows had stopped at the boundary. They wouldn't cross over into the normal world. They stayed in their territory, in the darkness surrounding that terrifying half-mile stretch. I drove for another 10 minutes before I was able to breathe normally. My entire body was shaking with adrenaline and fear. I was covered in sweat. My hands were numb from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. I had experienced something profoundly terrifying on that road, something that violated every rational understanding I had about how the world worked. I made it to my delivery destination. I unloaded the truck with mechanical precision. not thinking about what had happened, not allowing myself to process it. I filled out the paperwork and drove to a truck stop where I sat in my cab until morning, too afraid to sleep, too disturbed to think about anything except what I had encountered in that darkness. Over the following days, I researched everything I could about Blood Gravel Road. What I found was chilling. The road was built in 1956 over the site of a mass grave. Back in 1923, a traveling carnival had come through York County. There had been an accident during one of the shows. A terrible accident that had killed multiple people. The carnival workers had been blamed, accused of negligence. A mob had formed, a lynch mob. They had taken the workers into the forest along this very road and had killed them. Murdered them in a way that nobody wanted to talk about. The bodies had been dumped into a mass grave and covered over. Eventually, a road was built over that grave. Blood Gravel Road. A road built literally on top of the place where violence and murder and horror had occurred. The red stones started appearing after a highway expansion project in 2017. The construction had disrupted the ground. Workers reported seeing bones in the dirt. Human bones. Lots of them. They had unearthed the mass grave. The bones had been reburied. The ground had been covered back over. But something had awakened. Something that had been dormant for decades in the earth beneath that road. Since that night, I learned more terrifying details. People who have died on Blood Gravel Road have been found with their bodies covered in those red stones. Not just scattered around them, literally embedded in their skin, like the stones had entered their bodies from the inside. The police stopped investigating after a few cases because officers refused to go back to that road. They said it was too disturbing, too wrong, too full of something that defied rational explanation. The red stones keep appearing every night. The animals keep refusing to cross. The shadows keep moving in the darkness. And every few months, someone ignores the warnings and drives down that road. Some of them make it through. Most of the ones who make it through never drive again. They were too traumatized, too broken by what they experienced in the darkness. The rest of them don't to make it through at all. I think about that night frequently. I think about those shadows pressing against my truck. I think about that eerie silence. I think about the engine dying while I was surrounded by something terrifying. I think about how close I came to stopping, how close I came to becoming another victim of Blood Gravel Road. I also think about something else. I think about the fact that those shadows didn't attack me, that they let me escape, that they could have easily stopped my truck. They could have stopped me from leaving, but they didn't. They pulled back at the boundary. They returned to their territory. And I spent 7 years wondering why. Why did they let me go? Why did they choose not to take me? Sometimes I wonder if they were still waiting. If they let me go because they had other plans for me. If encountering them on that road somehow connected me to them. If I am still linked to them in some way that I don't understand. And sometimes, on certain nights, I hear that sound. That crunching sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Like tires rolling over red stones. And I wonder if they were calling me back. If they want me to return to Blood Gravel Road. If they were not finished with me yet. Blood Gravel Road is still there. The red stones still appear every night. The animals still refuse to cross. The shadows still move in the darkness. And the road keeps claiming victims. Drivers who think the stories are exaggerated. Drivers who think they can make it through. Drivers who don't understand that some roads are more than just pavement and gravel. Some roads are connected to places and things that shouldn't exist in the world of the living. Here, it's my question for you. If you were driving through rural Pennsylvania and encountered a road covered in red stones, with a terrible history buried underneath, would you have the courage to turn around? Or would you press forward and try to make it through, hoping to be one of the few who escape with their lives? Write your answer in the comments below. But whatever you do, if you ever find yourself driving near York County and you see a road marked with red gravel in the darkness, keep driving past it. Don't turn onto it. Don't investigate. Just keep going. Trust me, some roads are meant to stay forgotten. Some roads are meant to stay haunted. And some roads are still waiting and watching for the next driver foolish enough to believe they can survive the darkness. Story 6. Phantom Bus of Scranton. I got on the wrong bus at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and it took me somewhere that doesn't exist on any map. I am telling you this because if you ever see that bus, you need to run. You need to run and not look back, because it is still out there in the darkness of Scranton, Pennsylvania, collecting passengers who vanish into a place where time works differently than it does in our world. My name is David Mitchell. I am a software engineer. I lived a normal life in a normal apartment in a normal city until the night I made one terrible mistake that changed everything I thought I knew about reality. I was working late at the office downtown. Nothing unusual about that. I did it maybe twice a week, stayed past 9, finished projects, made myself feel productive and important. Around 11:30, I decided to head home. I took the elevator down to the street level, walked out into the cool autumn air, and headed toward the bus stop where I always caught my late-night transit home. The bus stop on the corner of Lackawanna Avenue was empty. Nobody was waiting. The shelter was lit by a single fluorescent light that flickered in that unsettling way that makes you feel like you were in a horror movie. I checked the transit schedule on my phone. The next bus was scheduled for 11:55. 7 more minutes of waiting in the darkness. I stood under the shelter and tried to look purposeful, trying not to feel the creeping unease that comes from being alone in a city at that hour. Then I heard it, the sound of a bus engine, deep and rhythmic. But there was something wrong with the sound. It was too slow, too heavy, like the engine was struggling to move something impossibly dense. The bus came around the corner a moment later, and I immediately knew something was off about it. The bus had no headlights. This should have been my first warning. This should have been the moment I walked away and called a taxi or asked someone to pick me up. But my brain wasn't functioning on that level. My brain was making excuses. The headlights must be broken. The driver must be getting them fixed. This was just an unlucky coincidence. The bus pulled up to the stop and the doors hissed open. The interior was dark, deeply dark, just the faint glow of a few ceiling lights that seemed to barely function, casting everything in shadow and inadequate illumination. I could make out the shape of seats. I could see the outline of other passengers sitting motionless in the darkness. And I could see the driver, his position at the front of the bus. Except there was no driver. The steering wheel sat unattended. The driver's seat was completely empty. My rational mind was screaming at me to step away, to let the doors close and walk toward the nearest taxi dispatch. But something else was happening. Something was pulling at me, drawing me into the bus. It felt like the right thing to do. Like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. Like the universe had arranged this moment specifically for me. I stepped onto the bus. The doors closed behind me with a hiss that sounded almost like a sigh. The bus began to move without any visible acceleration. It simply started moving, gliding smoothly away from the stop and into the darkness of the late-night city streets. I stood near the front of the bus, not sitting, not sure what to do. The other passengers didn't move. They sat perfectly still in their seats, not speaking, not looking at me, not acknowledging my presence at all. That's when I realized they weren't breathing. I could see their chests weren't moving. Their heads weren't turning. Their eyes weren't blinking. They were sitting in poses of complete stillness that no living person could maintain. The fear that had been lurking at the edge of my consciousness suddenly exploded into full panic. These weren't people. These were something else. Something that looked like people. Something that was shaped like people. But the thing that makes people alive, that spark of consciousness and biological function, it was completely absent. I looked toward the back of the bus and saw more of them. Dozens of passengers sitting in the darkness, all motionless, all staring straight ahead with expressions that weren't quite human. Faces that were shaped right but lacked the animation that comes with actual consciousness. It was like looking at a bus full of mannequins, or corpses, or something worse than other. The bus turned a corner and I realized I didn't recognize the street. This wasn't the route I knew. The buildings outside the windows were unfamiliar, older than the downtown architecture, more industrial, more haunted looking, like they hadn't been properly maintained in decades. The street was completely empty. No other cars, no pedestrians, just the phantom bus gliding through darkness that seemed deeper and more complete than normal night. I tried to move toward the door. I wanted off this bus. I wanted out of whatever terrifying situation I had walked into. But my body wouldn't respond properly. My legs felt heavy. My thoughts felt sluggish. It was like the bus itself was affecting my ability to function. Like the air inside was laced with something that was slowing down my physical and mental processes. The bus continued driving through streets that became increasingly unfamiliar and increasingly unsettling. The buildings got older, dirtier, more decrepit. Some of them looked like they were about to collapse. Windows were boarded up or shattered. The streets were littered with debris that shouldn't exist in a modern city. It was like we were driving through a forgotten part of Scranton that existed outside normal geography. A place that had been abandoned decades ago and left to rot. Then the bus stopped. We had pulled up to what looked like an old factory complex. Massive brick buildings loomed out of the darkness. Windows like empty eyes stared down at the street. The air around us felt heavier, more oppressive, more genuinely terrifying than anything I'd experienced before. The doors of the bus hissed open. One of the mannequin passengers stood up slowly, movement that was jerky and unnatural. Not the way a real human being would stand. It moved with mechanical precision, like its joints were controlled by strings or wires rather than biological muscles. It walked toward the doors and stepped out onto the empty street. Then another passenger stood up, and another, one by one. All of the frozen, motionless figures began to move with that same unsettling, jerky precision. They stood up. They walked to the doors. They stepped out into the darkness surrounding the abandoned factory. My terrified mind was processing what I was seeing. The bus was collecting passengers. These weren't people. These were things that looked like people. And this bus was transporting them to this location for some purpose that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I tried again to move toward the door. This time my body responded, but only partially. It was like I was moving through thick gel. Every motion required enormous effort. The fear was becoming overwhelming. My heart was racing. My breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. I had made a terrible mistake getting on this bus. Then I realized something that made the fear even worse. I was the last passenger left on the bus. All of the mannequins had exited. The bus was now empty except for me and the invisible driver at the front controls. And the bus was beginning to move again, starting to accelerate into motion towards some new destination in this nightmarish version of Scranton that seemed to exist outside of normal reality. I forced my sluggish body to move faster. I pushed myself down the aisle toward the door that had just closed. I hit the emergency release button. Nothing happened. I hit it again and again, over and over, my panic rising with each failed attempt. The door wouldn't open. The bus was locked, and it was accelerating into the darkness. Through the window, I could see the abandoned factory receding behind us. The bus was moving faster now, faster than any normal city bus should move. The landscape outside was changing. The old industrial area was giving way to something else, something that looked less like Scranton and more like a place that existed only in nightmares. The streets were becoming crooked and wrong. The buildings were melting into shapes that shouldn't be possible. The sky was getting darker, moving from night into something deeper than darkness. Something that felt like the absence of light itself. The terrifying realization was crystallizing in my mind. This bus wasn't taking me anywhere on Earth. This bus was traveling to a different place, a different dimension, a different reality where the laws of physics and geometry and sanity didn't apply. I screamed. I actually screamed and screamed, pulling on the safety handle next to the door, kicking at the glass, using every ounce of strength I had to try to escape. Nothing worked. The bus continued its impossible journey into the darkness. Then something changed. The bus started to slow down. The acceleration I had felt became deceleration. The horrifying landscape outside began to settle back into something that resembled reality. And ahead, I could see lights. Street lights. The familiar glow of a city at night. My own city. Scranton. The bus was coming back. We pulled up to a bus stop on a street I recognized. The Lackawanna Avenue stop. The exact same stop where I had boarded this nightmare bus. The doors hissed open. And without my conscious decision, my body moved toward the door. It was like I was a puppet now, like whatever had control of the bus had control of me as well. I stepped out onto the familiar street. Behind me, the doors closed. The bus began to move again, gliding away into the darkness. I stood on the street, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. The clock on the nearby building read 11:58. 11 minutes had passed since I had gotten on the bus, except it had felt like hours, maybe days. The passage of time inside that bus was wrong. It wasn't operating on normal temporal rules. I made it home somehow. I could remember the details of the walk. My mind was in shock. I locked myself in my apartment and didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the mannequin passengers with their empty faces and jerky movements. I could feel the oppressive weight of that bus pressing down on me. I could remember the sensation of being transported to a place that shouldn't exist. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I spent the day researching. I searched online for any reports of unusual bus activity in Scranton. I looked for urban legends. I searched paranormal forums. And slowly, I discovered that I wasn't the first person to have this experience. There were stories scattered across the internet. People from Scranton talking about a bus that arrived without headlights. A bus with no visible driver. A bus that collected passengers who were never seen again. The stories had been circulating for years, decades, maybe. They existed in the dark corners of Reddit threads and paranormal investigation websites. They were dismissed as urban legends, as creepy stories people told to scare their friends. But they all matched. They all described the exact same terrifying experience I had just lived through. I found a forum dedicated to people who claimed to have actually seen the phantom bus. There were 47 posts. 47 people describing essentially the same horrifying encounter. Late-night bus stops in Scranton. A bus arriving without headlights. Passengers who didn't appear human. The impossible journey to a place that wasn't on any map. But none of them answered the most important question. None of them explained where those mannequin passengers were being taken. And more importantly, none of them explained what happened to the people who had been on that bus before the current passengers. Because every post from someone claiming to have escaped the phantom bus, like I apparently had, ended with the same haunting statement. I don't remember getting home, but I was home the next morning, and I can remember the past few weeks of my life. It's like a chunk of my memory is missing. Like I lost time, reading that made my blood run cold. Lost time. That was the real horror. It wasn't just the weird bus. It wasn't just the mannequin passengers. It was the realization that something had happened to me that I couldn't. Do you remember? That hours or days or possibly much longer had been stolen from my conscious experience. I started keeping a journal. I wrote down everything I remembered about the bus ride. Every detail, every sensation, every disturbing image I could recall. I also started documenting my daily life. What I did, what I ate, where I went, who I talked to, anything to establish a baseline so I could detect if time was missing. Then I started noticing the gaps. They were small at first, a few minutes here and there where I couldn't remember what I had been doing. I would suddenly find myself in a different room of my apartment with no memory of walking there. I would look at the clock and see that an hour had passed, but I could only account for 15 minutes of it. The gaps were getting longer, more frequent, more terrifying. I knew what was happening. I knew with horrible certainty what was occurring. The phantom bus had marked me somehow. It had taken a piece of me that night, and it was claiming that piece back, bit by bit. The missing time was the bus reaching across the dimensional barrier that separated this world from the nightmare place it traveled to. It was taking back what it had let escape. I tried to fight it. I tried to stay awake. I tried to maintain awareness constantly. But you can fight something like this. You can to stay conscious forever. Eventually, you have to sleep. And when you sleep, the boundaries between worlds become thin. That is when the bus reaches through and claims what belongs to it. The gaps started occurring when I was asleep. I would go to bed and think I had slept for 8 hours, but I would wake up and 4 days had passed. My job was calling asking where I had been. My apartment had trash accumulated in the sink. Food in my refrigerator had rotted. It was like my body was functioning on some level, living and eating and moving, but my consciousness was absent. My consciousness was somewhere else, on the phantom bus, in that nightmare landscape that exists outside reality, with all those other passengers, with all those people who got on the bus and never got back off. I realized the horrifying truth. Those mannequin passengers weren't the inanimate objects. They were people. They were conscious. They were living, but they were trapped in some state between existence and non-existence. They were the previous passengers of the phantom bus, the people who had boarded and tried to escape like I had. And they had escaped. They had gotten off the bus. But something about the journey through that other place had changed them, had removed something essential from them, had turned them into puppet versions of themselves, into things that looked human but had the consciousness removed. And that was going to be my fate. The missing time was accelerating. Soon I would lose days at a time, then weeks, then months. Eventually, my consciousness would disconnect completely from my body, and I would become one of those passengers. I would sit motionless on the phantom bus, my body going through the motions of living while my true self existed in some incomprehensible other place. I had to find a way to stop it. I had to figure out why the bus was choosing me, why it had marked me for collection, why it was pulling at me, trying to drag me completely into its world. I started researching the bus itself, its history. The phantom bus had to have originated somewhere. It had to have a reason for existing. I dug into old Scranton historical records. I found references to a bus company that operated in the 1950s and 60s. Scranton Transit Authority. It had operated late-night routes throughout the city. Then one night in 1962, a bus had disappeared. A full vehicle with a driver and passengers. They found the bus the next morning, empty, parked in an abandoned lot. But something about the discovery was wrong. The bus was reported to be in impossibly good condition for having been abandoned overnight. And the driver, his personal belongings were inside, but he was gone. Vanished without a trace. After that incident, other buses started disappearing. One every few months. Always the late-night routes. Always the buses that carried passengers through the darkest hours of the night. Eventually, the bus company shut down. They couldn't explain the disappearances. They couldn't keep the vehicles operating safely. The whole operation was terminated. But the buses were still there, still operating in some dimension adjacent to our own, still collecting passengers, still transporting them to that horrible other place. I knew what I had to do. I had to get back on that bus. I had to find out where it was really going. I had to understand what was happening to those passengers. And I had to find a way to break the cycle before the missing time consumed me completely. I went back to the bus stop on Lackawanna Avenue. I waited at night, hour after hour, night after night. The missing time was getting worse. I would stand at the bus stop and suddenly it would be morning. Hours gone. Consciousness completely absent. My body doing something I had no awareness of. On the fourth night, I heard the sound of the bus engine. That same deep, rhythmic sound. That same raw, struggling quality. The phantom bus came around the corner without headlights. It pulled up to the stop. The doors hissed open. This time, I was ready. I had prepared myself mentally. I had written letters explaining what was happening. I had documented everything in case something went wrong. I stepped onto the bus knowing it might be the last step I ever took as a conscious human being. The bus was full, more passengers than before, all of them mannequins, all of them motionless, all of them with that disturbing lack of consciousness that marked them as things that had already been claimed. And then I saw something that stopped my heart completely. I saw myself, my own body sitting in the middle of the bus, my own face with that empty mannequin expression. My own consciousness was already here, already trapped, already part of the collection. The bus doors closed. The phantom bus accelerated into the darkness. And I understood. I had already been on this bus before. I had already made this journey. My consciousness had already been transported to that nightmare dimension. What was walking around in my apartment? What was going to work? What was living my life? That wasn't to me anymore. That was just the body left behind. The puppet, the mannequin. I was the real passenger now. And I would be on this bus forever, traveling through the darkness, experiencing that impossible journey repeatedly, picking up new passengers, collecting new people who made the mistake of boarding at the wrong time on the wrong night. The terrifying realization is that I never actually escaped the bus. None of us ever escape. We just think we do. We think we got away and made it home and went back to our normal lives. But that is the deception. That is the horror. We never left. Our bodies left. Our consciousness stayed behind on this bus. Living in the mannequins, trapped in that horrible other dimension, experiencing the same journey over and over again. And somewhere in Scranton tonight, there is still a phantom bus running its late-night routes. Still collecting passengers who will think they escaped. Still creating the illusion that we back in the real world living our normal lives, when the truth is far more terrifying. The truth is we trapped. We're all trapped on this bus. We're all becoming mannequins. We're all being transported to a place where time and space and reality itself don't work the way they should. If you live in Scranton, avoid the late-night bus stops. If you see a bus arriving without headlights, without a visible driver, run away as fast as you can. Because that bus is still out there. It is still collecting passengers. It is still making its rounds through the darkness. And once you get on, you never really get off. Blank. _blank. Now I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully about your answer. If you boarded a bus and something felt deeply wrong about it, but you couldn't to logically explain why, would you stay on and try to figure out what is happening? Or would you trust your instinct and get off immediately? Write your answer in the comments below. What would you do? Story 7. Lost Roamer of Lancaster County. I saw the headless figure on Harvest Road at 1 in the morning, and I've been trying to convince myself it wasn't too real ever since. But it was real. I know what I saw. And I'm terrified that it's going to come for me again. Because when something like that appears in your life, it doesn't just vanish. It establishes a connection. It creates a haunting that won't end until it gets what it came for. My name is Thomas, and I am an insurance adjuster. That is important because it explains why I was driving rural Lancaster County at 1 in the morning. I was heading back from a claim investigation in the Amish country outside of Pennsylvania. A farm fire Suspicious circumstances. I was handling the documentation because the case was borderline fraud and needed attention. I had stayed late at the farmhouse, interviewing the family, taking measurements, taking photographs. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. I was exhausted and eager to get back to my hotel. The drive through Lancaster County at night is eerie under the best circumstances. The roads are narrow and winding. There is minimal lighting. The landscape is dominated by Amish farms where no electric lights burn after dark. There are long stretches of complete darkness where you driving through absolute blackness, just your headlights illuminating the road ahead. It's unsettling. It makes you feel like you driving through a void, isolated, cut off from the normal world. I was on Harvest Road, a route I had taken during the day for the claim investigation. I knew it led back to the main highway. I was maybe 10 minutes from the main road when I saw the light. A lantern, swinging slowly along the side of the road about a quarter-mile ahead. The yellow glow of kerosene or candlelight. The kind of lantern the Amish use. Old-fashioned, pre-electric technology. There was something wrong about it, though. The way it was swinging was too rhythmic, too deliberate, almost mechanical in its precision. I slowed my car to get a better look. My headlights illuminated the figure holding the lantern. It was a person, dressed in dark clothing, long coat, possibly Amish attire, but something about the shape of the figure was horrifying. The proportions were wrong. The upper body was swinging the lantern back and forth, but there was no head. The neck just ended. Abruptly, where a head should have been, there was nothing but empty air. The figure was walking along the side of the road, walking deliberately, walking like it knew exactly where it was going, walking like a person would walk, despite the fact that it had no head, despite the fact that there was no face, no eyes to guide it, no brain to control its movement. I jerked my car to a stop. My mind was processing what I was seeing and rejecting it simultaneously. This wasn't possible. This violated everything I understood about biology and physics and reality itself. But I was seeing it. In the beam of my headlights, illuminated with perfect clarity, I was seeing a headless figure carrying a lantern along a rural Pennsylvania road at 1 a.m. The figure stopped walking. It turned toward my car. The motion was slow and deliberate and deeply wrong. A human body turning its torso 90 degrees without a head to guide the movement. The lantern swung up, pointing toward my headlights. The light was blinding, intense, too bright to be coming from a kerosene lantern. I threw my hand up to shield my eyes. When I looked back down at the road, the figure was gone. I sat in my car for 5 minutes. My hands were shaking. My heart was hammering. My rational mind was trying to construct an explanation. A trick of the light. The darkness and my exhaustion playing tricks on my vision. A hallucination brought on by late-night driving and the creepy atmosphere of the empty roads. But I knew what I had seen. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for alternative explanation. I started driving again. Slowly, carefully, my eyes scanning the darkness ahead of me. The road was empty. No figure, no lantern, just the empty Amish landscape rolling away on both sides of the pavement. I drove faster. I drove harder. I wanted to get out of that area. I wanted to get back to civilization and electric lights and people. I wanted to find some rational explanation for what I had just witnessed. I made it back to my hotel and didn't sleep. I researched all night. I looked for information about Amish folklore, ghost stories, local legends, and I found something that made my skin crawl. The Lost Roamer of Lancaster County. That is what it was called. A terrifying ghost story that had been part of Amish tradition for over 100 years. The legend went like this. There was an Amish man named Jacob Shearer who lived in the late 1800s. He was traveling home from a barn raising on Harvest Road when he got caught in a terrible storm. Lightning struck a tree near him. The tree fell and struck him down. When they found him the next morning, his body was there, but his head was missing. Completely gone. Lost in the darkness. Lost in the storm. They searched for 3 days but never found it. They buried what remained of Jacob with an empty space where his head should have been. And ever since that night, people claim to see Jacob on Harvest Road, his headless spirit carrying a lantern, swinging it back and forth, walking along the roads he had traveled in life, looking for something, searching for something. Some people said he was looking for his missing head. Others said he was looking for other people to take with him, to steal their heads, to find a replacement for what he had lost. The Amish didn't talk about it much. It was considered deeply unsettling, a violation of the natural order, a sign that something had gone wrong with Jacob, his death, something that had prevented his soul from resting properly. But travelers who reported seeing the lost roamer were always treated with a sort of sad respect by the Amish community, like they had witnessed something horrifying, something that marked them in a way that couldn't be undone. I spent the next day trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination, a waking dream, a panic attack manifesting as a visual hallucination. I interviewed more Amish families about the farm fire. I completed my claim assessment. I filled out all the necessary paperwork. I tried to live my normal life and pretend that nothing strange had happened. But I knew better. The experience had marked me. Something had changed inside me the moment I saw that headless figure. A recognition had occurred. A connection had been established. I felt it in my chest like a weight that wouldn't go away. I felt it in my mind like a recurring thought that I couldn't suppress. I was haunted. The lost roamer had seen me, and now I was aware of my existence. I tried to leave Lancaster County. I packed up my hotel room and began driving toward the highway that would take me back to Philadelphia and my normal life. But I made a wrong turn. I was so distracted by my thoughts about what I had seen that I took a turn that wasn't on my planned road. Suddenly I was on Harvest Road again, the same road where I had seen the figure, the same road where the lost roamer walked at night. It was late afternoon, still daylight. I shouldn't have been scared in broad daylight, but I was terrified. My instinct was screaming at me to get off this road as quickly as possible. I accelerated, driving faster, watching my mirror constantly, expecting to see a figure with a swinging lantern appearing behind me. Then I saw it, standing in a field on the left side of the road. In the daylight, under the open sky, the headless figure, standing perfectly still, the lantern hanging at its side, unlit in the afternoon sun. It was facing toward the road, facing toward where my car was passing, facing toward me. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. My car surged forward. I didn't look in the mirror again until I had driven for 10 minutes and confirmed I was on the main highway heading back to civilization. When I finally looked back, there was no sign of the figure. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was still there, on Harvest Road, waiting. Over the next 2 weeks, I experienced a series of disturbing events that I couldn't explain rationally. My sleep became fragmented and horrifying. I would wake up at 3 in the morning with the vivid sensation that I had been standing outside. My dreams were full of images of empty fields and swinging lanterns and the horrible sight of a headless figure walking toward me through darkness. I would wake up gasping and sweating, my heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that something was in my apartment with me, watching me, waiting for something. I called my doctor and described the symptoms: insomnia, night terrors, anxiety. He prescribed medication. It didn't help. The terrors continued, the dreams intensified, and slowly, a horrifying realization began to form in my mind. The lost roamer was communicating with me, using these dreams and visions and nighttime experiences as a form of contact, reaching across the barrier between the living world and the supernatural realm, drawing me toward something, pulling me back toward Harvest Road. I tried to resist. I tried to stay away from Lancaster County. I refused assignments that would have taken me back to that area. I turned down work that would have required me to drive through Amish country. But my employer noticed. They asked me why I was suddenly unavailable for certain regional work. I couldn't tell them the truth. I couldn't explain that I was being haunted by a headless ghost that was compelling me to return to the place where I had seen it. 3 weeks after my encounter, I received a phone call from the Amish farmer whose claim I had been investigating. The farm fire, he said he had something to tell me, something that he had been afraid to mention at the time of my investigation. He said that on the night of the fire, before the flames started, his family had seen something terrifying. They had seen a figure moving through their fields, a figure without a head, carrying a lantern, walking across their property like it was searching for something, like it was looking for a specific location. And the fire had started immediately after, consuming the barn where the figure had been standing. The farmer's family believed the fire had been caused by the lost roamer. They believed the headless ghost had brought the fire as a punishment for some unknown transgression. They were frightened and confused and deeply unsettled. They had almost not filed the insurance claim because they were afraid of what would happen if they attracted official attention to the fire. But they had finally decided to report it because they needed the money to rebuild. I told the farmer that the fire was likely caused by electrical failure or improper storage of combustible materials. I filed my claim report as accidental fire, but the farmer's story had confirmed something terrifying. The lost roamer wasn't just appearing to me in visions and dreams. It was actually manifesting in the physical world. It was causing real events, creating real danger. The fire was proof of that. That night, I had a dream that was different from the others. I wasn't just seeing the figure. I was seeing through its eyes. I was experiencing the world from the perspective of something that had no head. No eyes, no sensory organs in the conventional sense. And yet I could see, I could perceive. I was moving through the darkness of Harvest Road at 3 a.m, swinging a lantern back and forth, searching for something. Searching for someone. The dream was so vivid and so specific that when I woke up, I couldn't remember if I had actually been lying in my bed or if I had actually been walking the roads of Lancaster County. The next morning, I found dirt under my fingernail. Fresh dirt, the kind of dirt that came from walking through fields, and there were leaves stuck to the bottom of my pants. Leaves and small branches that could have come from the Amish countryside. I hadn't been outside. I had been home all night. I had locked my doors and windows. But somehow, my body had been somewhere else while my consciousness slept. I was losing time. I was losing control of my own body. The lost roamer wasn't just haunting me anymore. It was possessing me, using my body to walk the roads it had walked in life. Using my body to search for whatever it was searching for. Using my body as a vehicle to continue its eternal, restless journey. I called my doctor again and described the new symptoms. Sleepwalking, loss of time. My doctor strongly recommended psychiatric evaluation. I agreed because I was desperate. I went to a psychiatric hospital for observation. They kept me for 72 hours. They gave me medication. They talked to me about stress and anxiety and the power of the mind to create false memories and experiences. They tried to convince me that everything was psychological. Everything was manifestation of my own fear and paranoia. But on the night before I was scheduled to be released, I walked out of the locked psychiatric ward and ended up standing on Harvest Road. 11 miles away, in the middle of the night, with no memory of how I got there. The hospital staff found me standing on the side of the road, crying, unable to explain how I had escaped a locked facility and traveled that distance in the span of hours. That is when the doctor suggested that I should consider that something genuinely unexplainable might be happening to me. That modern psychology and psychiatry done to have answers for everything. That there might be something real in the world that we don't to understand. That sometimes the most terrifying possibilities are the most accurate ones. I was released from the hospital with a recommendation to seek ongoing psychiatric care. But I knew that wasn't going to help. No medication could fix what was happening to me. No therapist could help me understand what the lost roamer wanted from me. I was being pulled into something that existed outside the normal rules of reality. Something that belonged to the realm of folklore and supernatural terror. Something that was determined to complete whatever unfinished business it had. So I did something that I never thought I would do. I went back to Harvest Road. I drove there deliberately at 2 a.m, alone. I parked my car on the side of the road and got out and waited in the darkness. The figure appeared within minutes. The headless form walked toward me down the empty road. The lantern swung back and forth. The light was eerie and hypnotic. I stood frozen as the figure approached. My fear was overwhelming, but I felt like I was trapped in a dream where my body wouldn't respond to my commands. The figure stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell something strange coming from it. Not decay, not death, but something old, something that had been separated from the normal flow of time for over a century. I heard a voice, not with my ears, not something spoken in words, but a voice that formed directly in my mind, an ancient, terrifying voice that belonged to something that no longer had the capacity to speak with a mouth. The voice told me that I had been chosen, that I had seen something that most people never see, that I had acknowledged something that most people denied, that I was now marked as a witness, a carrier of knowledge about things that exist outside the normal world. The voice told me that the lost roamer was searching for someone to share his burden, someone to carry the weight of his haunting, someone to be the keeper of his story, someone to tell others about what he was, what he had become, why he walked the roads of Lancaster County forever, searching for his missing head. Searching for peace that would never come. I felt something change inside me at that moment. A part of me recognized that this was what the haunting had been leading toward all along. This was the purpose. I was being asked to become a messenger, to carry this knowledge forward, to speak about the lost roamer so that others would know, so that travelers on Harvest Road would understand what they were seeing when they witnessed the figure with the swinging lantern. The figure reached toward me, not with hands, but with something like intent, and I felt myself being drawn into the lantern. This light. I felt my consciousness expanding to encompass something beyond my individual experience. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down on me. I felt the loneliness of eternal haunting. I felt what it meant to be separated from peace, from rest, from the normal progression of death and afterlife. And then I was standing alone on Harvest Road. The figure was gone. The lantern was gone. But something inside me had changed. Some part of me had been altered by that encounter. I was no longer just Thomas, the insurance adjuster. I was something else now. Something that carried the knowledge of the lost roamer. Something that understood the supernatural realm in a way that most people never could. I'm writing this now to complete my purpose. To tell you what I have learned. What I have been forced to understand. The lost roamer of Lancaster County is real. He walks those roads at night, carrying his lantern, searching for something that can never be found. He is trapped in an eternal state between death and existence. He is lonely. He is terrifying. And he is still out there. If you ever travel through Lancaster County at night, and you see a figure carrying a lantern along the side of the road, do not ignore it. Do not try to explain it away. Do not convince yourself it is something normal. It's the lost roamer. And if you see him, if you truly acknowledge what he is, then you have been marked just like I have. You will become a carrier of his story. You will understand the hidden world that exists alongside our normal reality. I still experience the sleepwalking. I still have nights where I wake up on Harvest Road with no memory of how I got there. The haunting hasn't ended, but they accepted it. They understood that the lost roamer ISN, he's trying to hurt me. He is trying to communicate. He is trying to make sure that people know he exists. That people understand there are things in this world that defy explanation. That the supernatural is real, and it is waiting in the darkness of rural roads, carrying a lantern, searching for someone to hear its story. The lost roamer has found me, and through me, he is reaching out to you. If you acknowledge him, you become part of his haunting. You become a keeper of his terrible knowledge. You become a voice that will speak about what exists beyond the edge of the normal world. The question is, are you willing to carry that burden? Blank, underscore, blank, here. It's what I need to ask you. If you saw something genuinely supernatural, something that couldn't be explained rationally, would you tell people about it? Or would you stay silent to protect your reputation and sanity? Write your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you would do.